Happy Sunday afternoon, everyone.
Hi, guys.
All right, so this is another weekly Travel Therapy Mentor Sunday video. Tonight we're going to be talking about the top 5 mistakes that we usually see with new travelers when they're looking for their first contract. These are things that come up quite often, mistakes that we also made starting out, not all of them, but some of them. So important things to consider when you're looking for your first contract. A new Sunday means we're in a new city. We're in Vienna, Austria. We just got here today with these beautiful curtains in the background. This is the courtesy of the Hilton Garden Inn.
Yep.
So
it's our office for this week.
yes, this is a nice office space we have. So Whitney's going to introduce us and then we'll get into the topic.
Yeah, so for anybody who may or may not know us, my name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazazza.
And we are both traveling physical therapists. We run the site Travel Therapy Mentor as well as our personal blog, which is called fifthwheelpt.com. And many of you guys may already know us, and I know that some of you tune in with us on some of our weekly videos in the past. So if you guys are joining us again, thank you for supporting us and joining us. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. We're glad to have you here. So we try to do videos every week, most of the time on Sunday, but it doesn't always work out on Sunday. We try to do videos on different travel therapy topics. So as Jared alluded to, we are actually traveling outside of the country right now for fun. We're not working except for on the websites right now, so we're not doing physical therapy at the moment, but we are traveling through Europe. We're in Austria, Vienna, Austria now, and we have been traveling for 10 or 11 weeks?
Yep, 5 weeks left.
And we have about 5 weeks, 4.5 maybe, until we get back in the States. So it's been an awesome trip, and we've seen and done so much. But we've been trying to keep up with our content as far as travel therapy information goes. And this is a very opportune time that we wanted to take a chance to talk about those of you that are looking into taking your very first travel contract. Because we've been getting contacted by a lot of new grads recently, and then a few here and there of experienced clinicians that are getting into travel therapy for the first time as well. And there's a few mistakes that we're seeing kind of come up here and there, and unfortunately for some folks, one or more of these mistakes has led to a bad first contract experience. And we've talked to several different people who, after their very first travel contract, decided that travel just wasn't for them, and they had such a bad experience that they didn't want to take another travel job. And we find this very unfortunate because we feel like some of these situations maybe could have been avoided if they maybe knew what to look for a little bit more in their first contract, maybe had asked the right questions and that sort of thing. So that's what we want to talk about tonight, and I feel like it's a very timely discussion since it's July and a lot of folks graduate from different programs in May or August. And we know with physical therapy students, a lot of you guys have just taken boards. Either you graduated in May and took boards in April, or maybe just took boards last week. If we have anybody tuning in with us that is a new grad or maybe just took boards, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments. I know you guys haven't found out about your board scores just yet, hopefully this week.
Any day now.
So we're sending positive vibes to all you guys that are waiting to hear back about board scores. So that's a little bit about us and where we are this week. So tonight, as you're joining in with us, if you guys have questions about our topic tonight, about taking your first contract as a travel therapist, or anything about being a new travel therapist or a new grad, please feel free to write comments or questions in the comments. That goes for those of you watching it live or watching it on the replay. We'd also appreciate if you would tag a friend in the comments. That way we can spread this video around to some of the newer grads and newer therapists that are looking into getting into travel therapy. So if you're watching, tag a friend that you know is starting travel therapy soon. So Jared's going to dive into what we consider the top 5 mistakes to avoid when choosing your first travel therapy contract.
Yes, so number 1 is getting lowballed. So we see this a ton with new grads. New grads are coming out of school. They don't really know what to expect as far as how much to make as a travel therapist. They know that they have not very much money. They know they have a lot of debt. They know that they want to start making money as soon as possible. So what usually happens is you'll have these companies that market specifically to new grads. And the recruiter might sound awesome. The company sounds great. They might come to your school or job fairs. It sounds wonderful. and then you get this pay package that seems really good. And the reason it seems good is because you're comparing it to permanent jobs that your classmates are taking. You're like, wow, I'm making a lot of money. This is wonderful. But a lot of times those pay packages are really low. So travelers make a significant more than permanent therapists, sometimes twice as much. I know that me working as a new grad when we started, we weren't even making as much as we should have been as new grads. We weren't really well informed when we started out, and I was still making double what some of my classmates were. So, taking a job for way less than is the going rate for travel therapists is a huge mistake, and a lot of new grads make that mistake, or just new travel therapists.
Yeah. So a lot of you guys come to us with questions of how much money should I be looking to make? And the honest answer is it depends. So it depends highly on your discipline, so whether you're a PT, an OT, a speech therapist, or an assistant. It depends on the setting. It depends on the area of the country in which you're taking the job, and kind of the cost of living in that area. So a job in rural Virginia, for example, we're from Virginia, might pay a lot different than a job that's going to be in Northern Virginia, close to Washington, D.C., in a big city. Same goes for, somewhere that's maybe in the Midwest, maybe it's a small town, versus somewhere on the West Coast that's a big city like San Francisco. Your numbers there are going to vary greatly.
Yep.
So in general, as a ballpark figure for PT, OT, and speech, we always say try not to take less than $1,500 a week, and that's take home after taxes.
So that's your hourly pay after taxes plus the stipends that you get added together should probably be no less than $1,500 per week, unless it's some job that you just think is wonderful for you and you can't pass up.
And we'll get
that's
into
on
that.
the East Coast. So if it's on the West Coast, so most people know West Coast usually in general has higher cost of living than a lot of the East Coast or Midwest. If it's on the West Coast, I wouldn't recommend taking a job there, especially if it's in an expensive area for less than probably $1,700 a week after taxes.
And if it's a big city, if you're taking your first job in San Francisco, probably more like $1,800 a week. But $1,500 is kind of just a bare minimum for a general area, a medium cost of living area, especially more like Midwest and East Coast.
Yeah, and like when you said, the cost of living is a huge thing because so $1,500 on the East Coast, where for us we've never paid more than $800 a month for housing between the two of us. Whereas I know that there's some single travelers on the West Coast paying like $2,300 or $2,400 a month for housing. So that $300 a week difference is completely offset, or $400 a week even is completely offset by the difference in rent costs. And that's not always the case, but sometimes it is. So definitely have to take into account the cost of living in the area.
Yeah, and we're generalizing this East Coast versus West Coast thing because we know there's areas, for example, in New England, like if you're near New York City or Boston or somewhere in Connecticut, it might be really pricey there, and so maybe you should be looking more in that $1,600, $1,700 range.
And sometimes the crazy thing about those New England states is they still don't pay that well. We've seen this, and we know a lot of travelers that have traveled in that area and still don't make a lot of money, even though the cost of living is really high there. So take into account the pay package with the cost of living when you're making a decision.
Yeah. So for anybody who's just joined on with us, we are going through what we consider to be the top 5 mistakes that we want you to avoid when choosing your first travel therapy contract. And this goes for new grads as well as experienced clinicians who are just getting into travel therapy for the first time. I see a few new folks joined in. If you guys would say hi and let us know that you're watching, that way we know who's in our audience. Say hi, let us know who you are, if you're a new grad or if you're an experienced clinician. We'd love to hear from you if you're watching. Just leave us a comment.
Yep, so that goes right into number 2. So number 1, don't get lowballed. But number 2, a little bit in the opposite direction, is don't make pay the primary concern as your first job. That's another mistake we see. So some people that we are interacting with, and maybe they've been following us since they were 2nd or 3rd year students, so they're well informed, they know what they should make. They get hung up on pay being the primary thing for their first job. Pay is wonderful. Obviously, you don't want to get lowballed, but I do not think that should be the primary driving factor on your first contract. You want to make sure that the first contract fits you well. So I would much rather see a new grad take a contract that is in a setting that they're familiar with other staff there, with some ramp up time, not a long commute, things like that, for $200 a week less after taxes than take the highest paying job that is going to throw you right in and have no ramp up time, have to learn everything on the fly. That's going to be a bad experience, and we know a lot of travelers that get really turned off from travel because of that. They end up just jumping on a job because it offers high pay, but then the work environment is not great and they have a bad experience, and then they associate all of travel with that and then they stop traveling. So even though pay is important, on the first contract, make sure that you get a good job to get that first one under the belt, so that because just think about it, your first job, you're a new grad, it's a new setting, a lot of times a new location, first time ever working autonomously. So there's a lot of new things there. So if you can get the first job out of the way and then shoot for higher pay from then on out, that's great.
Yeah, and that even goes if you're an experienced clinician, because maybe you have only ever worked in one clinic before. So maybe you've been a year or 2 years or 5 years or 20 years at the same clinic. Now this is a whole new experience for you to move somewhere and have to pick up a new system. So you really want it to be somewhere that you're going to feel supported and feel successful in your very first contract, so that you want to continue traveling after that. You don't want to have a bad first experience and get screwed over because it was an awful job or wasn't a good fit for you. So this is kind of, I think a lot of people, a lot of experienced travelers kind of harp on this: don't get lowball, don't get lowball, don't take these low pay packages, because then you're bringing down the industry and all this. And we get that too. We don't want you taking jobs if you're a PT, OT, or speech therapist in the 13 and 1400s. But if it's a job that's 1500 or 1550 and it's a really good job for you, don't feel afraid to take it and jump on that opportunity, even if it's not the highest pay that you're getting offered, because the really high paying job that the other recruiter's offering you might just be because nobody else wants to take it. Like maybe it's a SNF that has 92% productivity and they haven't had a perm therapist in years, and maybe it's just not a great job, but they're dying to have somebody there, so they're offering 1800. That's not the job you want to jump on.
Yeah, and sometimes those lower paying jobs will be the ones that are new grad friendly, which is kind of an amorphous term. Sometimes it means a lot of different things to different facilities and different companies, but sometimes those are really great contracts where they really help you out and help you learn, and that's what I would really like all travelers to get on their first contract, is one where you can grow as a clinician, not just make a lot of money.
Yeah, and I kind of want to touch on what this sort of term that goes around that's called new grad pay. And a lot of therapists, experienced travelers will tell you that's a myth, that there's no such thing as new grad pay. A job's a job, it should pay the same across the board. There's some truth to that, but it's not always true, because we have definitely heard of some facilities that are going to be willing to accept a new grad and kind of have them have a ramp up time and mentor them a little bit leading into a job. And this goes for, I'm talking about travel jobs. There are travel jobs where they'll allow you to have more of a ramp up time, or say it's like something like home health where you don't have any experience and they're going to do a training period. Well, they're going to account for that in the bill rate, and they might actually drop the bill rate a little bit. Now, where it gets tricky is trying to figure out if it's truly a new grad rate or whether the recruiter's just lowballing you. And this is a situation you kind of have to feel out. Hopefully you've gotten a recommended recruiter from someone who's an existing traveler that you trust, so you know this is a good recruiter and they wouldn't do that to you. And hopefully you can have some candid conversations with them. We'll say, well, that pay seems kind of low. Why is that? And maybe they'll say, well, it's because the facility is going to expect you to be at a lower productivity the first 2 weeks and allow ramp up time, and they're accommodating for that in the pay. So just something to think about. That might not be a bad idea to take for your first job, because although we want to look at it like, we'll use PT for example, because we're both PTs. You've been through 7 years of higher education, you're ready to hit the ground running. You have to account for the fact that you are brand new. This is your very first job all on your own. There is going to be a learning curve. And so if you take your very first job in a supportive environment for a little bit lower pay, then you're going to be really ready when it comes to the second job, and you can play hardball a little bit more for that higher pay for your next contract, but you're going to feel really confident as a clinician going into that.
Yep. Hey Ryan, hey Isaac, hey Alex. Yeah. Thanks you guys for joining.
Thank you for joining in. If anybody else has joined on in the last few minutes, we'd love if you'd say hi below and let us know if you're a student, if you're a recent grad, a new grad, or if you're an experienced clinician. If you would just leave us a comment and let us know.
All right, so number 3 is taking a job in a setting you're not familiar with. So I actually did this, and I wouldn't recommend it, and my situation turned out to be okay. As a new grad going into a setting I had no experience with, I turned out all right, but I just got lucky. I would not recommend anyone else doing that. So we always recommend take your first assignment in a setting that you had some kind of clinicals in, ideally the one that you're most comfortable in. So for Whitney and I, that was both outpatient. We knew we wanted to work outpatient. And then we started looking for travel jobs. We kind of got pressured into some jobs in a location, and she ended up taking skilled nursing, and I took acute care, which is not at all what we were going for. And they weren't even high-paying jobs. So like I said, we made some of these mistakes in the beginning, so we know what to avoid now, and hopefully you guys can learn from us. But yes, try to take a job in a setting that you're at least a little familiar with, and that'll make that transition a lot easier.
Yeah, and this goes, again, not just for new grads, but for experienced clinicians, or maybe you're 1 year out or 2 years out as a clinician. Try to go into your first job in the setting you're most comfortable in. So if you're an experienced clinician, maybe the setting you work in the majority of your career, maybe you do want to diversify. Maybe you've been primarily an outpatient therapist and you do want to try home health and acute, but maybe for your first travel job, try to get the setting you're most comfortable in, because there's just so many other factors, like Jared mentioned earlier, whole new state, city, staff, caseload, documentation system, just schedule, everything. So you want to be pretty confident in your skill set of treating that population or in that setting, so that it kind of offsets all those other factors and sets you up for success in your first travel job.
And you have to remember too, on the first week of any assignment, whether it's your first one or your 15th one, the first week is stressful. Going in there and having to learn everything, learn all the patients, learn the staff. In addition to that, all the stuff going on outside of work. Maybe you're still getting your housing situation set up. Maybe you're looking for gyms in the area. You're looking for things to do on the weekend. Like it's a stressful time for the first week or two. So if you have at least some familiarity with the setting that you're going into, that really, really helps.
Yeah. Isaac says he is a second-year student about to go to his first clinical. So that's awesome, Isaac. Are you looking into doing travel therapy after you graduate? And if so, that's great. You're looking into it this early.
Yeah.
Do we have any other students on? Or
the sooner the better.
Or do we have any other recent new grads that have just taken the MPTE, the physical therapy new grads, or even OT new grads listening? Just say hi. So we want to jump into number 4 on the top 5 mistakes to avoid on your first travel therapy contract.
So number 4 is not asking the right questions in the interview with the facility. So we've written articles about this, we've done videos about this in the past, but when you're interviewing with a facility, you really want to make sure that it's a thorough interview. Usually these interviews, so most new grads or most new travel therapists don't understand how a travel therapy interview actually goes. I know that I was very nervous about this starting out, because you think, okay, I'm gonna have a phone interview, it's kind of nerve-wracking, what are they gonna ask me? Don't be nervous at all, because almost all of these phone interviews are basically you interviewing them. It's almost never them interviewing you, very rarely. One contract out of 4 years has been
for you, and
for me.
One for me. We've each had one interview out of 4 years that was an actual interview where they ask you those off-brand questions like, what type of book are you reading right now? Or what,
name a time that you were in a situation where you were uncomfortable and how did you handle it?
Or
like those kind of questions.
What areas are you interested in, and what areas have you pursued in continuing education courses? Like these kinds of like tough interview questions to find out, or how would you treat a knee patient?
Yeah.
Only one time have we each ever had that type of interview. Is very rare.
So normally you get on the phone, you're talking to the manager of the facility, and they'll say something like, we are a small outpatient clinic. We mostly see workers' comp, sports injuries, things like that, knee replacements. We have 2 other PTs on staff, 1 PTA and a tech. The area, they'll tell you a little bit about the area that the job's in, like the actual city, and then they'll be like, so what do you think? Or what questions do you have for me? And that's it. That's usually all. It's just like a summary of the job and the location, and that's it. And everything else is up to you to ask.
Sometimes it's like, when can you start?
Yeah.
They're just trying to get you there.
Yeah, so you need to go into that interview with a list of questions and really need to have it written down. And I figured this out over the years, because I always go into it, I'm like, oh, I'll remember all the questions I need to ask. And then I get in there and I get nervous, and then I get into conversation with the person. I'm like, I think that was everything. And then get off the phone, and Whitney's like, well, what's the clothing that you're supposed to wear? Is it business casual? I'm like, I don't know. Well, do you have to work weekends? I don't know. What's the documentation system? I forgot. Have a list written down.
I've gotten into making Jared a list of questions before his phone interviews, so that I make sure he hits all the points.
Yes.
So yeah, it's super important. We actually have an article about this I can link to about interview questions to ask. It's very important because what you want to know is they're going to be trying to sell you the job. And especially if you're a new grad or a new traveler, you're going to be like so excited, like, oh, this job, okay, great, it's the city I want to be in, and it's the setting I want to be in, and they made it sound great, and it's going to be awesome, and everything's going to be perfect. And so you're going to get so hyped up by them telling you how great the job is that you're going to forget to ask the hard questions, such as, what's the productivity? If you're interviewing for something like a sniff and they tell you the productivity is 90%, you have to be nice about it and say, okay, and if they say, like, can you handle that? You don't want to sound like you can't, but you also might want to find out ways in which this facility is going to support you to be able to maintain that type of productivity, because honestly, that type of productivity is not really that realistic. So if they say 90%, you might need to ask follow-up questions like, if it's a sniff, for example, is therapy already scheduled out for the patient for the day, or do I have to spend time in my morning scheduling my own patients out for the day? Because that could carve out a significant amount of your time. Like a job I had where there were different buildings, and I had to spend time each morning figuring out my patients for the day, which patient I was going to go see in which building. And my productivity was like 60%. It was awful. Even though they insured me, I wouldn't have any trouble meeting productivity. These are some sort of tough nitty-gritty questions that you need to ask to determine if it's going to be realistic.
Yep.
For another example about productivity would be like outpatient, asking if there's going to be double books, asking if there's overlapping patients, asking if there are overlapping patients, are they expecting you to get a certain number of units?
Yes.
And
Very important.
we're more talking about like PT stuff because that's kind of in our wheelhouse, but I know there's as an OT or a speech therapist who's listening to this, hopefully I'm jogging some ideas in your head for your practice setting that you might want to ask. But you need to think about how your day is going to run, because we have so many people. I can think of a couple new grads recently that talked to us, and their job sounded good when they did the interview, and it sounded all right, and they sounded like, oh, well, there's going to be a ramp up time, or you're not going to see that many patients. But when they actually get there, an example I can think of is they interviewed with the regional manager, and the regional manager assured them everything was going to be okay. But when they actually got there, the manager on site was like, okay, here's your caseload, see these people, and they were not supportive.
Yep.
So just think about this in your interview. Who are you interviewing with? Do they actually know how the clinic runs? Are they actually going to support you the way they say they do in the interview? So there's a lot that you have to ascertain, I guess, from the interview to determine if it's going to be a good fit for you and you're going to thrive in that environment, or if it's going to be sink or swim.
Yep, and a lot of managers are very good especially older managers, over the years, they've gotten very good at using vague answers or kind of working their way around your question. And don't let that happen, because things like, oh, is there going to be double booking? And they say, sometimes, but it's not a big deal. They'll say that kind of stuff, and you're like, what does that mean? Does that mean it'll be like sometimes every day, like a couple every day, or just occasionally? Or you need to clarify those things, mm-hmm. because I had a situation like that where the regional manager was like, we almost never have double books. You might have one occasionally, and then it ended up being 3 or 4 a day, mm-hmm. which was definitely not something I would have voluntarily signed up for.
So if it's your very first interview, period, maybe if you're a new grad, it's your very first interview you've ever had, maybe definitely your very first phone interview, it's hard, it's challenging to be really savvy and sound confident in yourself and try to sell yourself to the job, but also ask all these questions. So you have to find a middle ground where you're schmoozing them a little bit because they're schmoozing you a little bit, and they're going to do oh, it'll be fine, you'll do great, and then you'll be like, oh yeah, I will do great, but just curious,
yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You just kind of have to ascertain this information, because otherwise you can get there and then it can just be completely different. I can't tell you, at least 2 of my jobs, both of which were SNF, the phone interview sounded great. I got off the phone, said, Jared, it sounds great, I'm going to take the job, it sounds good. Get there, completely different than what they told me on the phone, just awful. So don't let that happen to you. That is one of the biggest mistakes that we have happen, and I think one of the biggest reasons why people end up having a bad experience, because they maybe didn't ask the right questions or weren't thorough enough in their interview.
Yep. So Mo said, new grad, just signed first travel contract a few days ago. Excited, but already having some minor issues. Yeah, we're taking questions, so if you have any questions, we'll help if we can, for sure.
Yeah, so Mo, that's really good. We'd really love to hear kind of what issues you're having, because you're probably not alone. You're probably like many other new grads who have had some issues or had some concerns when they're getting ready for their first contract. And for somebody like Mo, I know that a lot of you guys might want to know, once you've already picked a contract, some things to look for and try to avoid on contract. And we're actually going to do a separate video maybe about that. This one's just more about what to look for in your first contract.
Okay, so number 5.
So number 5, this is especially for the new grads, but I think for the new travel therapists in general, experienced or not. Number 5 mistake that we see is not having another therapist of your same discipline at the facility.
Yep.
So we highly, highly recommend that if you're a new grad and this is going to be your very first job, much less very first travel job, but very first job as a clinician, that you have another person on staff of your same discipline.
Yeah, so there's situations where you'll interview for a travel job and it'll be something where it's like a small skilled nursing or maybe a small outpatient, and the previous therapist there, so sometimes it'll be a full-time person or sometimes it'll be another traveler, is leaving the Friday before you get there, and you're just going to come in and take on a whole caseload. And a lot of times the managers will be like, oh, well, it's not a big deal, we have very experienced PTAs here or OTAs or whatever the situation is, techs, and they can help you and all that. As a new grad especially, I would never ever recommend doing that. I interviewed for a position like that when I was a new grad, and I almost took it, and it was an outpatient. It was a very small outpatient, and I'm glad I didn't. And I always recommend to any new grads, take a job where there's some experienced people on staff, because no matter how well prepared you are, you're gonna have questions, whether about treatment or about documentation or about facility procedures, billing. There are so many things that as a new grad, you don't even know that you're going to encounter until you actually do it in the clinic.
You literally don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's just so many little things that you don't think about. Maybe your last 2 clinicals, you were so autonomous. Your CI lets you take on everything, but that was after maybe a couple weeks of him introducing the facility to you, or he or she introducing the facility to you, and that sort of thing. Just little stuff like you have a difficult patient and you don't really know whether it's like clinic protocol to call the physician, or is there, maybe there's an orthopedic protocol you don't have, or what about Medicare Part A billing for this patient, and what about this and that, and where are the supplies, and
yes, outpatient we run into all the time on new travel contracts, what the protocols are for the physicians in the area. So you take for granted a lot of times as a student where you have a CI that's familiar with the area, or as a permanent physician or a permanent PT where you've worked with the same physicians in the area, that everything's there. You have these protocols that you go by, and they know what you're doing, you know what they're doing. But you go to a new area and you get a patient come in after a rotator cuff repair and you don't have any protocol at all. And it's like, okay, well, I can just go buy something online, but you don't know if the physician is going to be okay with that. So then who do you clarify that with? Do you call the office? Usually in that situation, you want to ask another PT that's been in that situation there, and they'll have the answers. But if you don't have that person, then there's a lot more time that goes into figuring out how to handle that.
Yeah, and then, if you're an OT or a speech therapist, say you're working in a skilled nursing facility or acute care, imagine things like, where do I find the supplies, or where, what if I need to call a physician who's not in the hospital, or obviously not in the skilled nursing facility, like that kind of stuff. Sometimes, as a caveat to this, sometimes your other staff can help you. They don't always have to be your same discipline. My very first job as a PT, I was told there was going to be another PT on staff. It turned out she was on medical leave, and I had a wonderful OT, a wonderful speech therapist, and wonderful PTAs that helped me a lot. But I still think I would have been more successful and would have had a much better experience, and I would have cried a lot less on my first contract if I had another PT there, as was promised. So don't take that for granted. I know that some therapists, some new grads, or some new clinicians who are even experienced do jump into their first travel job as the only therapist, but we would just take it, don't take that lightly, definitely take it into consideration.
Yep. Okay, so that's the top 5. We're getting some questions now. If you guys that are watching have any other questions, feel free to ask. If you got value from these 5 things, please like this video so that more people see it. That would be awesome. We're going to go through the questions and then we'll recap everything at the end.
Yep. Okay, so Andrew wants to know 2 questions. So what can you do if you get to the facility and it's completely different from what they told you it would be?
It's a tough situation. Very rarely is it going to be completely different. I think a lot of times what happens is they give you vague answers, and then you have different expectations than what they were implying, kind of. It's not going to be a situation where they just completely lie to you. I would say that would be...
Except where they lied to me and said there's another PT on so.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing, is it was like an answer where it's like, oh yeah, there's another PT, but she won't be in the clinic. You know, they leave that part out.
She was employed there, but
yes.
she was gone.
So they'll give these kind of vague answers, which is, and it's not all facilities. So this is not a real common thing. This is just something that we want to mention that you guys should watch out for. But this has happened to us once or twice in 4 years, so it's not something you're going to have every contract. I don't want you to go into these interviews thinking that the manager is trying to lie to you or anything. But if it is completely different, then the first thing is talk to the manager about it and just say like, hey, I thought you said this, and go over what your expectations were and see what they say about it. A lot of times they're gonna help work with you and try to adjust things, because they don't want to have another traveler come in. They don't want you to get mad and leave after being there 1 week, and then they have to hire another traveler while the patients aren't seen. So almost always they're going to try to be accommodating with you. So very first thing, talk to the manager there. If that doesn't resolve things, they're like, oh, sorry, you're on your own, then talk to your recruiter about it and say, this isn't what I signed up for. If things don't change, I'm not going to stay here. And then almost always, then the recruiter can contact either the manager or the regional manager and try to make some changes. Mm-hmm. And if worst case scenario, then you would just leave that situation if it doesn't work for you.
I would generally say to loop the recruiter in simultaneously, at least just mention to them that something's going on, but maybe don't have them intervene on your behalf, because under most circumstances, once you've taken the job, the recruiter's kind of out of the picture. You want to be your own clinician. You want to work well among the staff. You want to work well with your manager on site if at all possible. But if it gets to the point where that's not working, then go to the recruiter. Let the recruiter know what's going on, but don't have them intervene until it became absolutely necessary.
Yeah, you want to have you want to basically give the manager the benefit of the doubt in any kind of situation like that, and let them try to rectify things before you go over their head. Mm-hmm. That's a good policy to have with any situation. If you were at a permanent job and something happened with the manager, you would want to talk to the manager before you go over their head to a regional manager. That's just going to cause more problems.
Right.
So take it up with them first. Of course, do it in a nice way. But yeah, if things don't change, go to the recruiter, and then worst case scenario, leave the facility.
Okay. So Andrew's second question is, how do recruiters get paid? For example, the PT company or the facility, he means, that you're working for offers hypothetically $1,800 a week for a position, and then the recruiter offers it to you for $1,600 a week, and therefore will profit $200 a week. So that's not exactly how it works. So this is a topic we've covered in how pay works in general. The facility pays the travel company an hourly rate, which is called the bill rate. And then the travel company converts that pay into hourly and stipend pay if you are a traveler who qualifies for stipend pay by maintaining a proper tax home. So a bill rate could be somewhere for a PT, for example, maybe $55 to $75 an hour. And this is a taxed amount that the facility pays the recruiter or the company who's the middleman. Then from that amount, they have to take out overhead. So this is things like paying part of your insurance premiums, paying part of the taxes to have you as an employee, paying their staff, paying the recruiter, paying
liability insurance, mm-hmm. overhead, like as far as buildings, electricity,
keeping
all
the
those
company
things
up and running. So they have to take out a percentage of what's called the bill rate, and then they build the remaining amount. So for example, say they take out $20 out of that $75. So then say there's $55 an hour remaining. They will pay you based off of that in the form of an hourly and a stipend.
And maybe reimbursements as well.
Yeah. So how the recruiter gets paid is different for different companies. So some of them I think kind of have like a base salary, and then they also get like a commission per therapist. But we don't know every single company how they get paid exactly, but in general, that's how it works.
In general, there's going to be a base salary, not a high base salary, but enough for them to make it if they didn't have any travelers, possibly. And then a lot of times they get paid an hourly amount per hour that their travelers work. So the ones that they have on contract, it was going to vary by the company, and it'll also sometimes be a tiered system where the more travelers they have, the more money they make from each traveler per hour they work. So for example, say a recruiter has 10 therapists on contract, they make $1 per hour those therapists work. So 10 therapists working 40-hour weeks is $400 a week that traveler would get on top of their base pay, right? But then say it's a tiered system where if they get to 20, then they get $1.50 per hour per therapist worked, per hour worked, So a lot of times it'll be something like that. So they get paid per hour that you work. So a lot of times it's kind of a good thing because they have an incentive to have you work just like you want to be working. Like they have kind of a little bit interest aligned with yours.
Mm-hmm. But probably, Andrew, I'm imagining, clarify if I'm wrong, the reason you're asking this is, do they have incentive to keep more money for themselves? In some cases, yes.
Yeah.
But this is why we recommend that you get recruiter recommendations from someone who's experienced. If you guys are interested in getting recruiter recommendations for people that we work with, you can comment recruiter in the comments, and we'd be happy to send you some recommendations, or from a friend or a classmate or another traveler that you know. It's best to get recommendations so that you can know that it's a trustworthy recruiter, someone who is going to have both your interests at heart. And, yes, it is a business. Yes, they do have to make money, but some recruiters are better than others, and there are some recruiters out there that will try to keep more money because they think that you don't know any better.
Now, the way that usually works, I guess we should talk about that real quick, is a lot of times they'll have a little bit of leeway with their margins. So it'll be something like, say the company actually needs 20% of that bill rate to cover all of their expenses and profit. They might give the recruiter some leeway where they could either keep only 20% or up to 25%. So maybe there'll be a 5% leeway. So maybe the recruiter tries to get you to take a job where they're keeping 25% instead of 20% of that bill rate. And if they do, sometimes the incentive will be a bonus at the end of like a month or a quarter or a year. So a lot of times that money doesn't come directly from your pay package, but a lot of times they are incentivized to keep a higher percentage if they can, which is why negotiating is important, why working with more than one company is important. Mm-hmm. So then they're competing against each other and they're less likely to keep a higher percentage.
Yep. So if they know that you're also working with other recruiters and you have other offers coming in, they're going to try to put their best foot forward, give you their best offer every time without you having to really haggle with them and negotiate with them.
Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense. If you didn't understand any of that, ask another question. We'll try to clarify.
Yeah, let us know, Andrew. Okay, Whitney Randall says, how can you assure the job situation will be what they say on the phone interview? Is there a way to build those verbal agreements on double books, productivity, etc. into your contract? We don't, not necessarily. So we don't usually recommend that you actually get productivity written into your contract because sometimes they can use it against you. So if you agree, yeah, I can do 85, and they write 85 in there, but then there's a week where you have a lot of discharges or evals and things are crazy and you can't get to your patients because nursing's with them all the time and you drop below 85, there are some companies that say they'll drop your pay.
Yeah, they'll deduct money from your pay for not getting that 85%.
And we highly recommend that you don't sign contracts that say anything like that because we all know that things happen. So we don't necessarily get productivity and things like that written into our contract, but I would say, have a good verbal agreement with the manager, and if it's the regional manager, it's tricky when it's the regional manager because then
Ideally what you would do there is you would say, okay, everything sounds great. Is there a way that I can talk to the manager I'll be working directly under? Mm-hmm. That's the best way to go about it because then you can actually ask the other person the same questions and see if those things match up. Mm-hmm. If they do, it's probably a good thing. If they're completely different, that's going to be a red flag. Yeah. But no, usually those things are not going to be written in the contract. It's more of a verbal thing. And like I said, they're almost never going to just blatantly lie to you, and because they know that if they lie to you, you get there, you don't like it, you leave, and then they have to find someone else. Yeah. So they're not going to blatantly lie to you, and they're going to try to work with you if there's a problem.
One thing I want to point out, for example, how they might not blatantly lie, but they might stretch the truth. This goes back to, especially for PTs in outpatient, talking about what we'll usually ask if for an outpatient job is something like, how many patients do you expect to see in a day? And do your therapists usually have, is there documentation time built in, or do they usually have an easy time getting all their documentation completed throughout the day while seeing that many patients? For example, are there texts to help? Does the front desk person do the scheduling for you? That sort of thing. Are they is support staff taking some stuff off your plate so you have time to get your notes done? Or ask if there's documentation time built in. Most of the time there isn't, but sometimes there is. Now, what I've had happen a couple times during interviews is they'll say something like, oh yeah, you'll have time to get your notes done, and if not, you can take your laptop home at night, that's fine.
Yeah.
And they try to just smooth it over real nice, but what they're saying is they're going to treat you like a salaried employee and have you go home for 2 to 3 hours a night and do your notes and not get paid for it, and that's not okay. So either we just internalize that, and when we get off the phone, we tell our recruiter we're not taking that job. Or if we really like the job, maybe we'll address it with the person on the phone right then and say, well, I'm an hourly employee, I don't take my laptop home to do notes, and then see what they say.
Or what I have done in the past is if everything else sounds okay, I'll go take that job, and if I end up having to do notes after patients are gone over 40 hours, then I just write that on my timesheet. And then almost always that sparks a conversation, because you turn in this timesheet to the manager to sign and say it has 42 hours on it, and they know that they're going to have to pay you 2 hours of overtime. They'll be like, well, what happened here? And you'll be like, well, I'm an hourly employee, I'm not salary, so I just write the times that I worked. And either they pay you for overtime, or they have to adjust your schedule so that doesn't happen anymore. A lot of travelers will just let that go, and they'll just work the extra hours and not make a big deal of it. But I think that's a mistake. That's just inviting them to take advantage of you.
Yeah. So let us know if that makes sense. We've got a couple other questions coming through that we're going to answer, and then we're going to recap what we thought were our top 5 mistakes. So again, if you're tuning in and you have questions for us, please leave your questions in the comments. Please hit the like button, give us a thumbs up if this has been helpful to you, and please tag a friend. We know there's a lot of new grads out there, a lot of maybe a couple years out, or experienced therapists that are looking to get into travel therapy, and we would love to share this information with them. So we please ask you, just tag a friend that you know that's getting into travel therapy.
And if you're watching the replay of this video, sometimes these videos, I'll go back and look like 3 days later, and they have 3 times as many views as when we recorded them. So I know a lot of people are watching these later, and if you have questions later, just also put them in the comments, and it'll still notify us, and we can go back and answer them. We can just, write an answer instead of answering it.
Okay, so Mo is going to tell us a little bit about her situation. So we'll read her situation, and then you guys can hopefully learn from our answers. So Mo is a new grad, I believe you said, that is about to take your first contract. So Mo says, I signed my contract on Thursday, and then on Friday I was informed at 3:30 from my compliance officer that I would need to complete numerous medical tests and about 10 to 15 hours of paperwork and modules by Monday. They scheduled these at an urgent care facility and informed me they would be at my expense. Some of these items may not even be possible to procure under the deadline, like a physician's statement, but the company is acting as though this deadline cannot be changed. This seems unreasonable to me. Any recommendations?
Yeah, that's not an ideal situation, definitely. A lot of times, so there definitely should be, there's almost always going to be a background check for almost every single contract. We've had to do a background check, a drug test, a physical, and a PPD test, almost every single contract. So that is normal to have to do that, but it's not normal to only have 2 days and those 2 days be a weekend. Mm-hmm. That's very stressful. As far as
it being at your expense.
Yeah, almost always those things are going to be reimbursed. A lot of companies, or at least a couple of the companies we work with, they pay for those things up front, so you never have to worry about it. So when we have to go get a drug test, we have to go get our PPD test and all that, we just get a form, an email, we print it out, a PDF, and we take it to urgent care, they scan it, and I guess that bills directly to the travel company, and we never deal with it. We have had companies that we worked with where we get those things, we have to pay for it up front, and then they reimburse us for it once we start the contract. I can't think of almost any company that wouldn't reimburse
That's
for
not true.
those expenses?
I've definitely heard ones that don't.
Oh, really?
I've heard ones that say they don't, and those actually aren't companies we've ended up taking jobs with. But in our negotiations, like for example, we had a company submit us for a job, and you may not remember this because we didn't end up taking the job, and they said that your first physical and your first PPD and your first couple of things are your responsibility. And I basically said, I'm not used to that. I'm used to it being reimbursed. And I mean, we're talking like $100, $15 for this.
Which as a new grad, it can be a big deal if you don't have any money.
So I more or less said, I'm used to having this reimbursed. And in our negotiations, the recruiter came around and said, if we get to the point where the interview goes well and that's a deal breaker for you, I'll talk to my manager and see if I can get it covered. Because for a big company, $100 is not much to reimburse you.
It's a reimbursement, so they don't even pay payroll taxes on your behalf on that money.
Yeah.
So if you push it, I cannot think of any company that would pass on a contract because they don't want to reimburse you for that.
Yeah.
So definitely try to push that and try to get that paid for.
Yeah.
As far as
10 to 15
modules,
hours. Yeah.
so 10 to 15 hours of modules, that can be fairly common. We've had that a couple times in 4 years. Not really common, but in that situation, we almost always want to get paid for that. So you have to remember that the pay that the facility is paying the travel company, it's only a certain amount, right? So for the whole contract, they're only getting a certain amount. So how they give you that money, it's not going to just be created out of thin air, right? So if they give you money up front for those modules, that's going to come from your pay somewhere else. But still, I would want to get paid for those hours, even if that means a slightly lower weekly pay from that point on out. So say like that means $20 less per week to get those covered up front. I would still want that money up front because you never know what's going to happen with that contract. Say you do those modules and then they end your contract on week 2, and then you wasted basically 2 full days of work doing modules that you weren't paid for. So I would definitely try to push to get that time paid for, because that's work. I mean, that is work for that contract. You should be paid for that time.
Yeah, and it kind of varies. Like honestly, we've had to do a little bit here and there. Maybe the paperwork took us an hour, or there was a little HIPAA thing they wanted us to fill out and it took 2 hours. If it's something like that, I mean, that's pretty standard. It's not a huge deal. But if it's something like 10 to 15 hours of modules, yes, I would discuss with your recruiter how you're going to be reimbursed for that.
Most contracts will have those kind of training modules, but it will be something that you do on the first day or 2 in there while you're getting paid for it. So you go in, you talk to the staff, you learn about the facility, and then you do maybe 6 hours of training and modules and stuff, and that's fairly common, but at least you're getting paid for that time. So I would always push to get paid for that.
Yeah, so I hope that helps. Let us know if that answers your question, Mel. Alex says that, I'm sorry, Alex, I can't tell from just in the comments if it's an Alex female or an Alex male, but Alex says that he or she would like a recruiter. If anyone else would like some recommendations from us for recruiters that we work with, just type recruiter in the comments and we can message you after this. We always like to message you guys and find out a little bit about you, because we don't just want to give a blanket statement of these are the best recruiters, because we know a lot of recruiters and we like them all for different reasons. So there might be a good recruiter for a new grad versus someone who's more experienced versus someone who wants jobs in a certain area versus... And
it's not even just the recruiter. Sometimes it's the companies. Some companies have higher overhead, so they have lower pay, but they have more jobs, and they have more outpatient jobs. So if, like, say a certain setting is exactly what you want, then you might be willing to take a little bit lower pay to get that setting, whereas other people might be willing to take any setting, but they want the highest pay. So, So that helps us try to figure out who to send you to, basically.
Yeah. And then I see Emily has tuned in with us. Hi, Emily. Thanks for joining. And then Karen has a question for us. So Karen says, if I want to take a temp contract... Oh, got a few recruiter requests coming in. If I want to take a temp contract job less than 50 miles from home, can I ask for any additional pay other than the regular pay of the locals? I want to do travel further from home later, but I can't at this time. I like the idea of a 13-week contract. So Karen's basically asking about taking more of a local travel job. Karen, we've actually done a specific video about local travel, and after this, when we get done, I can send you a message and link to that video where we talk all about the ins and outs of being like a local traveler. But yes, you should hopefully, if you were going to be a temp employee, try to get a little bit higher pay, or if you could find a way to take it through a travel company, you might make the same as like a PRN rate.
Sometimes a little more than that. And you get benefits too.
You would get benefits. So it'd be like a regular employee who's working 40 hours a week for 13 weeks, but getting a PRN rate and benefits. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds. So hopefully that's the case. It should be a little bit more than PRN.
Yeah, if you're taking it through a travel company and it's, so the 50-mile thing is not necessarily a set in stone rule. It is that you need to be duplicating expenses. So if you don't have any intention of having an extra household that you're paying expenses on, so you'd normally have your home, and then you'd be traveling outside of your home where you'd be going and getting an apartment or whatever. If you don't have any intention of doing that, then all of the pay is taxed, right? So you would still get the same amount of pay as a traveler. It's just that you'd pay higher taxes on that pay. So your take-home pay, your net pay, is not going to be as high. Your gross pay is going to be the same. Working through a travel company, you'll have benefits, which is better than PRN. And a lot of times the rate is similar or maybe a little bit higher than PRN. So you should expect a little bit more because it's temporary. If you're signing on for a permanent job, then you should make a little bit less because you have this certainty of hours and of extended contract. Yeah. Whereas if it's just a short-term thing, usually they're going to be willing to pay you more for that.
Okay. If you're watching and you're a new grad or a new traveler who's tuning into this and what Jared was just talking about was kind of confusing to you, we've got separate videos about local contracting. We've got separate videos about tax homes, and I've got a really good article. That sounds really biased. A really good article.
Yeah. Really good article that I wrote.
Hopefully an informative article that would be helpful to you about tax homes, but kind of outside the scope of this video. So just want to do a quick recap. We've got a few people asking for recruiter recommendations. So, and Isaac wants to know about local contracting. So I will link to that video about local contracting. And for those of you that want to get recommendations for recruiters that we have worked with in the past, we will send you a message after this. Again, if anybody else is watching now or replay, just comment recruiter and we'll get in touch with you about that. Yep. So let's do a quick recap of everything we talked about tonight.
So the top 5.
Yep, top 5.
1, don't accept lowball pay.
Top 5 what?
Top 5 things to avoid when choosing your first travel contract.
Whether a new grad or an experienced clinician choosing your first travel contract. So top 5 things that we think you should avoid these mistakes so you will be successful as a new travel therapist.
Don't get lowballed. That's the first thing. On pay. A lot of recruiters and companies, especially new grads, knowing that you don't really have a baseline pay that you're trying to work from, will offer you a lot lower and see if you take it. And a lot of new grads will just take it because they don't know any better and they don't want to be confrontational about it. Yep. So don't get lowballed.
Yep. So know your worth. Ask fellow travel therapists. Ask us if you think you're getting lowballed. And
if you have a pay package from a company and you think it might be low, or even if you don't think it's low and you want to send it to us, we look at those all the time and we'll just read over real quick and say, yeah, I think that's okay, or no, I think that's too low.
Yep.
So feel free to send those to us.
Okay. Number 2,
even though you're trying not to get lowballed, don't make pay the primary concern on your first contract. Make sure that the contract is a good fit for you as a therapist, and make pay a more secondary thing. So the first contract, get one under your belt that is comfortable, that sounds like it's going to be a good fit, that you'll have some support, and you'll basically be able to build some confidence going into future contracts.
Yep, so it should be a great job, one that you're going to feel supportive and thrive in as a therapist, and it's not going to be sink or swim.
Yep, I'd much rather see someone take low pay and be in a supportive environment than to take high pay and be in a bad situation.
Yep. Number 3.
Taking a job in a setting that you're not familiar with.
So we recommend that for your very first travel job, whether you're a new grad or an experienced clinician, take your first travel contract in a setting that you are familiar with, either one that you've had prior experience as a therapist working in, or one that you've had a lot of clinical experience in. So again, you can feel supported and feel like you're going to thrive in that environment, and that's one less factor to worry about for your very first travel contract. It is okay if you want to try new settings for later contracts, but for your very first one, I would take it in a setting that you're familiar with.
Yep. Number 4, not asking the right questions in the interview. So remember, like I said, these interviews are not going to be them interviewing you. It's going to be you interviewing them about whether...
In most cases.
Most cases, almost all. about whether you want to take the job or not. So make sure that you have a list of questions. Everything that we have an article about this if you're not sure what to ask on the website. We can link to that if you guys are interested. All the questions that we normally ask, make sure you ask all the hard questions. If there's vague answers, clarify. Be very, very specific about the questions, especially on that first contract. Make sure that it's a good situation for you. And that goes back to number 2. Make sure that first assignment is a good fit for you.
Be confident during the first interview, but also don't be afraid to ask questions and clarify everything. Okay, and number 5.
Not having another therapist at the facility that is the same discipline as you. So almost always for your first contract, especially as a new grad, you want to have another therapist there that you can ask questions about billing, facility standards or rules, patient situations that are unfamiliar, all those different things, protocols, like I mentioned, all those things. You want to have someone in there that you can ask about if you're ever uncertain. And there's going to be situations, whether new grad or not, where you're going to be uncertain. Every single contract, I bet in the first 2 weeks, I have 10 or 15 questions that I'm asking another therapist
1 million questions.
Yeah, at least. So documentation system problems, all kinds of things. Where do I write an assessment in this documentation system? You're going to ask those questions. It's much better to have someone there that is completely familiar with it, is looking at things with the same sort of perspective as you. You know, they're the same discipline. They know exactly how they do things. They
and
can
they're
tell
not, maybe not the manager. I mean,
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world if that person of the same discipline is the manager, but sometimes it's nice to have another staff therapist of your same discipline
Very nice.
who's kind of going through the same things as you are. So those are what we consider the top 5. Of course, there's a million other considerations, but these are the big things that we want you guys to consider when taking your first travel contract, so you can be set up for success. Not something where you're going to sink or swim and have the contract canceled early, or you're going to cancel early, or you're going to say, forget travel therapy, it's not for me. We want you to have a very successful first contract.
Yep. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please like it, comment, tag someone else that's going to be a recent or a new traveler coming up, so that hopefully they can learn. We do these weekly videos every week, so if you're interested in watching these videos, we've been doing this for 6 months now, so we've got tons of videos. I think it's like probably 25 hours of videos, which is it's too much.
That's a lot of
It's
hearing
too much.
us talk.
But anyway, some of those topics might interest you, so go back through our old videos. Anything else?
Yep, that's it. So next week I think we'll be coming at you guys from Bratislava, Slovakia. So so tune in next week. And maybe we'll do another topic about new grads, because we got a lot of new grads coming in.
Yeah, we'll probably
now.
do the one, something about top 5 things to watch out for when you start a contract or something like that. Like after you've already, you already have everything signed, you did all these things, you didn't glowball and all that, and then you're actually going into the contract, what should you watch out for?
Yep. All right, so tune in with us next week. And again, Isaac, Alex, everybody, thank you for joining in. Isaac said, I'm glad I randomly found this stream, and let's stay in touch. Absolutely, Isaac. We'd love to keep in touch as you continue through your program, as you prepare to be a travel therapist, and everyone else too. Again, tag a friend if you want them to hear this information as well. If they're a student or they're a new grad or a current clinician that has the travel bug and wants to start traveling as well.
Yep. Thanks for watching.
So,
see you guys next week.
Good night.
Bye.